Most literary professionals have the very best of intentions, but even so, we often throw around terms that are unfamiliar and, even worse, easily misunderstood from our industry. And I hear all the time that authors hear these terms, interpret them the wrong way, and really make bad choices about what to do next with their book. And that's why I want to talk through the top 10 most misunderstood terms from the publishing industry. Stay tuned. You've got the story, you've got the idea, you just don't know the steps in the process. If this is what's holding your memoir back, I have got the solution for you. The Memoir Method Checklist is going to take you through every single step you need from idea to published marketable book. And you can download it now at pageandpodium.com/checklist. When you're a first-time author who is publishing traditionally, you no doubt know you have a lot to learn. In fact, I often hear from folks that this part is so overwhelming, all the way from the querying and submission process, all the way through that book's production process. Basically, you are being thrown into the deep end, often feeling as though you don't have a guide. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that once you get into this traditional publishing world, which will happen typically by querying agents who then will take your book on sub, I'll talk about that in just a little bit, and then you will hopefully get that book contract. Through that process, keep in mind that you have plenty of support. Not only will you have your agent, you'll also have your acquisitions editor as well as the staff at the press to take you through the process. But I'll bet even in that little opening blurb, there were at least a term or two that you're not totally sure of the definition. And I know, even though you've got people on your team at that publishing house, another term I'm going to define in a second, you might still not want to ask them all the definitions of these little terms. And sometimes you might not even know that you need to. And that's why today I want to go through the top 10 misunderstood terms from the literary publishing industry. And we're going to start with the word agent. Now, I'll bet if you've been watching this channel for long, you do have some sense of what a literary agent is. But one thing I have found over the years is that because most of us first encounter the term agent when we're thinking of celebrity agents, it's very, very common that folks will kind of misunderstand the role of a literary agent. A literary agent is a little bit different than a celebrity's agent in that the literary agent really only represents you to the publishing house. That is to say, your agent's job is not to promote you or your book to the general public. That is a different person who is called a publicist. Typically, your press is not going to supply you with a publicist. They might ask you to purchase a publicist, or they might encourage you to pay for a publicist service, but a publicist is not something that is built into the chain of your book to agent to press to audience. A publicist is a separate person. Usually they work for a agency, a publicist agency. But your agent is not the person that is doing that. So as you go into the relationship with your agent, just know they are there for you, but they are not that kind of wheelin' dealin' cell phone guy that you might have seen on shows like Entourage or other things like that. Okay, number 9, very closely related to agents, is the term slush. Oh, it's the worst term, right? We just came out of a kind of a hard winter here. We had some pretty big snows, and at the end of those snow days, there is slush everywhere. That kind of gray, nasty stuff, it gets up on your car, especially if you're in a place where they salt the road. It is not a very good association. And for that reason, I find a lot of authors kind of balk at the idea that their manuscript is most likely going into an agent's slush pile. This is the wrong reaction, though. All a slush pile is a group of manuscripts that the agent did not request. Hands down, the most common way your manuscript will get into an agent's hands is through a slush pile. Now, sometimes you will have a warm introduction, right? Where you know someone who has an agent or you know someone who knows an agent, and you're able to get them to introduce you to that agent. Then your manuscript is probably not going in the slush pile because you have an in. The slush pile is for manuscripts that have not been invited. Now, I was curious about when this term originated, and I wasn't sure, so I looked it up. And the first recorded use of the term slush pile was in 1952, and that's significant. Of course, in the 1950s, we did not have email. We didn't even have computers. So the way that you would submit your manuscript is you would take the physical hard copy manuscript and you would mail it to agents. It's weird to even think about that now because submitting is actually a pretty quick process once you get over the fear of it. But during that time, agents would have big piles of these submitted manuscripts and they would have to dig through them like you might sift through slush. It does not mean that they don't want your manuscript. It doesn't mean that they look at it as some kind of dirty thing that's going to mess up the finish on their car. It just simply means that it is part of the group of unsolicited manuscripts that make up the majority of authors agents sign. I want to be really clear about that. Agents need slush piles. Slush piles are where their clients come from. So when you hear the term slush pile, do not think it is something to avoid at all costs. In fact, if you are an author looking for a traditional contract, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get there through the slush pile. So let's celebrate it. It's not a bad term. All right, number 8 in our countdown of 10 misunderstood literary terms is the phrase on sub. Now, I used this earlier and kind of teased that we were going to talk about it, but I do find this language rolls off the tongue of literary professionals and very often stumps new authors. On sub is short for the phrase on submission, and what this means is that your agent has already acquired you as a client, your manuscript, and now they are going to take it to the people in publishing houses who are responsible for acquiring those manuscripts. We'll talk about this in a second, but those people are called acquisitions editors. So your agent is going on sub by submitting your project to the people that might consider signing you for a book contract. That's all it means. On sub. This process can take a little bit of time, but it's really nothing to be afraid of. So it's great if you can get on sub. It means you've got an agent who is ready to show your book off to the publishing world. We love it. Okay, number 7. Before you get on sub, you may be asked to make some revisions by your agent. In nonfiction, as I have talked about very, very often, the way that your book is sold is through your book proposal. And very often, your agent will want you to make some revisions to your proposal. Either they will help you make those revisions, they will make them themselves, or they will ask you to make the revisions. Oftentimes, by the time you have got a solid enough book proposal that you are querying agents, you will find that their feedback is going to be referred to as high level. And that's the term I want to talk about. Very often, authors will think high level means good. That a manuscript is high level if it is excellent, it's mid-level if it's not very good, low level if it's bad. That is not what is meant by high level. All we mean by high level in the publishing industry is that we are taking a 10,000-foot view of your book or your proposal. So high level revisions are very often things like structure. In your book proposal, it may be things like the framing. How are you kind of talking about the market for the book, its relevance, that kind of thing. But what we mean by high level is that we're not doing line edits. High level edits are going to be larger, kind of more conceptual edits. They're really important. We've got to do them, but they don't mean better or worse. They just simply refer to how zoomed out you are. Okay, number 7, our 7th term in our countdown is the word trenches. Now, you probably actually are not misunderstanding this word, but it does have a couple meanings, and more importantly, it has a big connotation. So usually in the literary industry, when we're talking about the trenches, we're usually talking about the querying trenches. This is the time period when you are sending out queries to agents. You're trying to get in their slush pile, and you're sending query as you wait for agents to get back to you. It can be really demoralizing. This stage can often go on for a year or even more, and very often it feels a little bit like warfare. And that's where we get this term querying trenches or being in the trenches. Now, the thing that I want you to remember about being in the trenches is that sometimes this kind of connotation of thinking about being in the trenches being in kind of a warfare state, sometimes that actually is really helpful, right? Sometimes we are really trying to get down to business, get this stuff out, get going. And at those times, being in the trenches actually makes total sense. In fact, it feels exactly right for where you are, and it can even be motivating in some cases. But the reason that I added trenches to my list of misunderstood terms is that what you don't have to do is consider yourself in the trenches if it doesn't feel good. While you are querying, there are lots of things you can be doing. One perspective is that you are in the trenches, you are fighting, you are thinking about this every day, you are kind of watching, you're tracking. That is great if that is working for you. For many people, that's just not the best mindset. And in those cases, you might want to kind of bring your mindset out of that trench position and either think about a new project that you want to work on, start working on that, or as we often recommend to nonfiction authors, as you are in the trenches, maybe shift your attention away from that warfare-like metaphor into building your platform. Now, I didn't include platform in this list because I talk so often about building your platform. So if that's something that's interesting to you, check out the YouTube channel or the podcast wherever you happen to be watching or listening. And there are tons of videos that we have on building your nonfiction platform. But the point is, if being in the trenches doesn't feel good to you, just shift gears, start writing a new project, go hang out with your family, watch some TV, or work on building your platform. You do not have to be in the trenches. Okay, our sixth term in this countdown is the term blurb. It's the silliest term. I really hate saying it. All we mean by blurb is endorsement. And in fact, because I do not like the term blurb, I typically just use the term endorsement. They mean the same thing. All a blurb is a short little bit of endorsing text where some other, usually author, but sometimes expert, is saying, this book is so good, you have to read it. If you have ever bought a general nonfiction or fiction book, you will often see the blurbs either on the top of the front cover or on nonfiction. Often there will be a couple on the back cover. Now, the thing I did want to mention here, just because it's timely and relevant, is that for many, many years, it has been the author's responsibility to request and secure blurbs for their book. I know it's really, really weird, right? But it is the authors who are reaching out to other authors or to experts in their field to ask them to review their manuscript and send them a quick blurb. Now, pro tip, many authors will increase their odds of having a positive response from the people that they're asking for blurbs by writing some sample blurbs and sending them along. So the way that you'll do this is you'll include language that's something like, here are some samples of what your blurb might look like. Please feel free to edit these as you would like or write your own. Mileage may vary. Some people like that, some people don't. But I've had authors have pretty good luck with that strategy, so I did want to mention it. Now, there is a bit of a shift in today's publishing industry. This is news that came out just right at the beginning of 2025, that some of the major publishing houses are starting to back away from authors asking for these blurbs. Whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, just kind of depends, but it is something to kind of be thinking about as you are moving into this traditional deal. You may be asked to request blurbs yourself, or you may not. It just depends. All right, that is what a blurb is. They are very important. All right, number 4 in our countdown is the term trade. Now, when we're talking about trade in the publishing industry, we're typically talking about a trade book or sometimes a trade audience. All we mean by trade is that this is a book that is intended for general audiences. Essentially, these are the books that make up the bulk of the publishing trade, and hence trade books. Now, it's easiest to kind of think about what a trade book would be in opposition to, and the easiest way to think about this is a textbook. A textbook is not for general audiences. It is a very, very specific market. So we wouldn't call that a trade book. We wouldn't pitch it as a trade book. We wouldn't expect to pay the same amount of money for it as a trade book. Trade books are the books that you can go into any bookstore. There they are on the shelves. That's a trade book. Just means it's for general audiences, doesn't have any positive or negative connotation in the industry. It just is a classification term. And similarly, Our next term on the list is midlist. This is similar to high level that I was talking about earlier. One thing that I find is that a lot of authors will hear the term midlist and assume that that means that they're mediocre. Couldn't be further from the truth. What we mean when we say a book is midlist is that it's selling pretty well. A mid-list book is different from a front-list book, which means the new books that the press has coming out that they are actively promoting and trying to get out there. It's not a backlist book, meaning it's an older book that isn't being promoted anymore. A mid-list book simply means a book that's been out for a bit and steadily makes revenue for the press. A mid-list book is a great thing. So as you hear the term midlist, that does not mean the middle of the pack in terms of quality or talent of the author. It simply means it's not brand new and it hasn't been backlisted. It is in the middle. Okay. Number 2 is the term imprint. Imprint is a term that I find myself throwing around and not defining very well, so I thought I'd put it into this top 10 list for y'all. An imprint is simply the brand name of a publishing house. So this can mean a couple different things. Usually when we say imprint, we're talking about the individual brand trade names underneath a larger publishing house. So for instance, Penguin Random House, which I know is a dreamy publisher for so many of you watching this, has hundreds, literally hundreds of imprints. These are often smaller presses that the larger publishing house has acquired, has just purchased and brought under their umbrella. But the other thing I want to mention is that an imprint can also just be the trade name that's used by a smaller publisher. So for instance, if you are publishing at, say, Ohio State University Press, shout out, I love them. Ohio State University Press is your imprint. And the reason I want to bring that up is I am certain that I have got some self-publishing authors watching this or folks who are considering it. And one thing that I want to mention is that when you think of imprint, that is not like a trademark. An imprint is not something that has to be officially registered in any way. So when you are self-publishing, one trick that I recommend across the board to self-publishing authors is that you found an imprint. Sounds scary, I know, but all this means is that you are, instead of independently published, you're published under an imprint. It just happens that you own that imprint. So you can name an imprint after yourself, you can be creative and come up with your own, but an imprint is just simply a brand name. Sometimes it is a smaller brand name under a larger umbrella. We can think of this as kind of make versus model of a vehicle, but sometimes an imprint is just the brand of a smaller publisher. They mean the same thing, just whoever your publisher is. And I know the moment you have all been waiting for, the number one misunderstood tip in publishing, and whoo, it's a doozy, editor. Okay, I teased this earlier, but the reason that editor is such a confusing, fraught term is that it means a lot of things. So when we are talking about the editors that your agent is going on sub to try to get a contract from, those are called acquisitions editors. That just simply means they are the people who acquire your book for the press. Acquisitions editors are your first point of contact at really any publishing house, whether that's a large publishing house and you're working with a particular imprint, or if it is a smaller publishing house. The acquisitions editor is the person that's going to bring your manuscript in, work with you if it's necessary to make any revisions that they'd like you to make, all that kind of thing. You will talk to other people who are serving the function of editor in a different sense as you go through this pipeline. So the easiest to think about is a copy editor. A copy editor is really, really different from an acquisitions editor, and so much so that it's sometimes odd that they even have the same name, but there are reasons. We're just not going to go into them. A copy editor is going to be focused on your line level prose. So your book will not go to copy editing to a copy editor until it is solid in terms of the high level changes. Once we've got the structure in place, the theme, the framing, all of that jazz, then we are ready to move into copy editing, where that editor will tighten up your prose, look for anything that's kind of confusing or out of place, continuity, making sure that you're mentioning and introducing characters on the first mention, that sort of thing. There also are people called developmental editors. Now, a developmental editor is not typically somebody you'll encounter through the press, But you may end up hiring or working with, in another way, a developmental editor. A developmental editor is somebody that is doing the high level reviews. So they're looking at your manuscript, telling you kind of where they want more, where they think you should have less. If you should restructure, they'll let you know that. If they think your theme isn't strong enough or your message. A developmental editor is high level. A copy editor is in the prose at that kind of low line level, is what we often will call it. But typically, when you're talking about the publishing process from a traditional sense, you are talking about an acquisitions editor. Oftentimes, we'll just call him my editor, but that's what we mean. It's the person that has acquired your book. Now, if you're looking for a different type of editor, a copy editor or a developmental editor, reach out. We offer all of those services at Page and Podium. And in fact, I serve as the acquisitions editor for our hybrid press. So if you'd like to reach out, think about publishing with us, let me know. For now, good luck in this whole entire process from idea to published. I know you can do it. Happy writing. You know what they say, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And this is exactly what holds so many people back on their memoir projects. That is exactly why we created the Memoir Method Checklist, a full, complete list of every single step you need to take to get that memoir written, published, and marketed successfully. You can download it now at pageandpodium.com/checklist.